This particular tape will be the first in a series of tapes that will cover the classical weapons as used in the Chinese system. This particular introduction is a remake of one that I had previously. I had originally planned for this first tape to be strictly one tape, approximately 2 hours in length. As I got to the final entity, I decided that there was need for greater explanation and a breakdown on perhaps each of these weapon sets. In addition, I also decided to elaborate upon the introduction. For this reason, the first set now of tapes containing 6 different weapons will now be on 2 different tapes, unless you're in beta, which allows me generally to expand it to a full 3 hours. Perhaps I'd better give you a little bit of introduction as to the history of weapons, particularly in the Kenpo system, as related to the entire Chinese system. The basic Kenpo system lacked 2 distinct aspects of the martial arts that kept it from being a complete system. The first was the adequate presentation as a tournament fighting system. For this reason, my brother and I years ago then hired the world karate champion, Joe Lewis, to introduce tournament freestyle and full contact freestyle into the Kenpo system. The second aspect that Kenpo was lacking in was a set of complete weapons, and this is true of most of the other Gung Fu systems. They have all borrowed from others. What I have done now, for the last 20 years, I've been studying different weapon systems, the practical application, and their use within the system. At the end of now almost 25 years, I am formally putting together a series of weapon sets that will work from a progressive, simple to a complex system out of the perhaps 70 or 80 different weapon sets that I've learned and practiced. When it comes to weapons, most Americans, even within our own system, are completely unfamiliar with the use of weapons such as handguns, the knives, and things that make up our modern society. I found this is also true within the martial arts world. Most martial artists play with the different weapon sets and things like this, and very few martial artists have a true understanding of the knowledge and application of the practical aspects of self-defense. A classic example, of course, being the use now of such weapons as the throwing star. And contrary to the movies and popular belief, any object thrown from any distance does not have a penetrating power, first of all, even to enter the human body, let alone do much damage, or as you see in the movies, an instantaneous kill. The same is true of the nunchuck. Here is a weapon that's used quite commonly throughout the different martial arts systems and schools and things like this, yet it's a very ineffective weapon. The fact that it takes so long to gain proficiency in this, and as opposed to the natural extension of the arm, such as a club, you have an uncontrolled length. As we talk about the basic application of weapons now, almost without exception, all effective weapons are simply an extension of the hand. A classic example of this is the common handgun used in all countries of the world. For those of you unfamiliar with use of a handgun or any weapon, remember, there is no such thing as an unloaded handgun, rifle, shotgun, or weapon. At all times, all weapons are loaded. You'll notice that the revolver, the rifle, any of these movements, any of these different weapons are simply an extension of the hand. The same thing is true of the bow and arrow. The same thing now is true of one of the most common objects you can grab, a club. Notice that your movements with the hand are simply extended in this particular motion from here by the use of the club. This is exaggerated even more when we take our basic staff movements from here. Let's take a basic figure 8 hand move, the block. The same thing is true from here. Notice the forward punch is simply the extension of the staff. For a weapon to be truly effective then, that's exactly what it has to be. It has to be an adaptation that you would use with all of your hand movements. And this is what makes the Kenpo system quite effective when it comes to using the different weapons, all of the classical Chinese weapons. Every one of these is simply an adaptation of the hand movements we have in our different katas and self-defense techniques. We're going to break the introductory set of weapons into three main groups. First of all, we're going to work with the staffs. We'll have two staff sets, and I'm going to give a complete breakdown on this. We're going to have two sets that contain a spear. Then we're going to have two sets from here of weapons that consist of the sword. The first sword set will be a Japanese sword set, which will be the only bladed weapon set that I will introduce that is actually of Japanese origin, and I do it for two reasons. One, first of all, it's the first weapon set that I ever learned. And second, it will give you a chance to make a comparison between the Japanese application on a bladed weapon and the Chinese. The second bladed weapon that we'll use will be the butterfly knife, which is, for all practical purposes, from a concealed weapon standpoint, one of the most practical of all weapon sets that you can learn. At this point now, I want to give a detailed explanation and breakdown of the origin and the application of the different staff that we have. Next to the short club, of course, the staff was the second weapon that man used against himself and other animals. It was one of the easiest things in nature to find that the classical staff was simply the branch of a tree that had been broken off and perhaps trimmed to size, or a small sapling itself. The Chinese, in particular, break their staffs into two applications. One we call the double-headed staff, and the other is referred to as a single-headed staff. The double-headed staff, while used in both north and south, is more common in the southern region. Since both ends of the staff are going to be used, and this is why it's called a two-headed and double-headed staff, it became known as an eyebrow staff. And you'll notice that this was an individual thing. As a general rule, it always came to exactly the height of the eyebrow because of the spinning movements, things like this, in relation to the height of the individual. It allowed you to spin the movement from side to side and use both ends without hitting the ground. The other staff used based in Chinese from here is a single-headed staff from here, generally tapered in nature, but the main difference between this is its length. The classical distance is as high as you can reach. So you have the difference between the eyebrow and as far as you can reach, which for rounding off is approximately 18 inches to 2 feet. The difference, of course, being the reach on this particular movement, and because of the reach involved in this, generally was not used in a two-handed movement from here where you're using both ends, but to concentrate the power and the advantage you have from the reach from here, it is generally used with the tapered end as a striking weapon. The third type of staff that we have in the United States now is more typically of the Japanese, or more correctly the Okinawan origin from here, which is generally a staff that's 6 feet in length, because this is the standard length of doweling that anyone can find. It's tapered at both ends. What this has a tendency to do then is to reduce the weight of the staff so the staff can be moved faster. Remember, in any type of weapon set, basically what you're using from here in the staff is a bludgeon, a striking movement from here. It's a compromise, a trade-off of two different principles. First of all, the staff has to be light enough that it can be moved with speed. But secondly, it has to have enough weight so when the contact is made against the opponent himself or against the opponent's weapon or shield and things like this, that it will have enough power to make penetration. The difference, of course, being the difference between the power and speed of a jab and the power of a right lunge punch. The one great disadvantage that you have with a tapered staff is that basically it can be used only at short range. One of the classical advantages of the Chinese single-headed is that by swinging it from here, you can achieve great range in things like this. Also, classically, because the single-headed staff is normally tapered, when you swing it, because of the taper getting larger at the base of the staff, as it swings out and centrifugal force catches the staff from here, it gets tighter in the hand. If you try this with a tapered staff, it's exactly the opposite. The taper is getting smaller than at this point, unless you have extremely tight control. And this is a problem when you make contact with the individual and things like this. The hand will have a tendency to slip off completely because the taper is going in the opposite direction. As a general rule, this is not a problem within the Japanese and the Okinawan type of sets because it's generally controlled with both hands from here, and they do not reach out to the end and use it in a swinging movement. Notice also that if I try to use it as a poking movement from here also, that what I'm doing at this particular point in the tapered staff is losing the benefit of having the large butt end to grab with, because as I'm poking from here, I have a smaller end to control. The basic sets then that we're going to be using are going to be the classic Chinese, and generally the sets are a combination of both the double-headed and single-headed staff, so you have the advantage of both. We also have practical limitations we have to worry about today. I have a very large studio with 16-foot ceilings for clearance and things like this, and the average school and dojo, you may at the most have a 10-foot ceiling with limited space and things like this. So in the practice, what we find is, as a general rule, the staves are shorter than you would normally use in practical application. When we talk now about the practical application of the staff set, is that too many systems use the staff improperly. Classic example from this is that everyone assumes that on the staff, what you're trying to always do is strike to the head or strike to the body. Those become secondary targets. Remember, in any type of weapon, set and things like this, that weapon is going to be held in the hand. And this is the distinct disadvantage that you have, particularly with a two-headed staff when it's short. The primary target that you go against is never the body. It's always the hand. Because as soon as you've injured or crippled the hand, the opponent is no longer able to control their own weapon, not able to defend themselves. The classic difference, of course, being is that the staff is just an object you could pick up anywhere. When we talk about weapons, though, that were designed for fighting, without exception, they always have a guard. Take any weapon that has a guard. When the contact is made from here, slide in. Notice that the guard from here will always catch to keep the blade from continuing in. This is not true of the staff. All you have to do is make contact with the staff, and I'll break this down with a partner second and follow in, and you can always make contact from here, the hand. This is why then the Chinese preferred what they call the king of the weapons, the spear. This particular spear is approximately 7 feet in length. This has been standardized for ease of application. It will vary anywhere from 7 to 9 feet. The advantage that you have against any type of sword or something like this, they can never reach the hand. And the primary application of the spear is the ability to shoot it forward with your classic spearing movement from here. So because you're able to keep your opponent at a greater distance, you don't have to worry about the hand or having a hand guard, because no matter where the opponent makes contact with your weapon, it's going to be at least 2 to 3 to 4 feet away from your hand movements. At this point now, I will bring a partner in to show you the application either in a blocking movement, striking movement. The first movement that you always use against an opponent is also carrying a weapon, particularly in this particular case a staff. Whenever we're working staff against staff, I could really care less about the skill of my opponent. All I really want to know is if the opponent is going to use the staff as a two-headed staff or a one-handed staff. If it's used as a two-handed, generally from here, the control is going to be more to the center. If it's used as a single-headed staff, generally they're going to use the reach. Against an opponent, I can really care less. I can take it, first of all, as an offensive weapon, or I can take it as a defensive movement. It really doesn't matter, because in each case, all I'm really interested here is striking the opponent's hand. Once you've broken the opponent's hand, crippled the opponent, they can't use the weapon whatsoever. What I'm going to do in this particular case is simply have the opponent take it into position from here as if it were going to be used two ends. Okay. I can also, in this particular case, have either short or long. I'm assuming in this particular case that I have the advantage of length. Notice that this particular case, and even if I strike to the head or I miss my movement, there's no way that the opponent, because of the distance from here, can hit me. No matter what the opponent tries to do from this point, there's nothing really the opponent can do to keep me from catching his hand. I'll take it first of all. I'm going to miss the hand, I hope, from here, and take it strictly as an offensive movement from here. Rather than strike to the head or the body, which the opponent is expecting things from here, the strike is going to be directed to the hand of the opponent. On the other hand, I can also use it as a counter-striking movement from here. Notice in the first one, I took it strictly as offensive movement and went to the opponent's hand. Let's assume that I want to make the strike to the head, and the opponent in the classical method from here blocks my staff so I can't hit the head. I can care less. I continue from here, following straight down the staff to take the hand movement over. A classical movement from here, if the opponent is adept enough on this one, is to completely clear my staff past the head, what we call a two-hand movement from here, so that I could not strike the head, so that it's cleared completely past the head. From here, I will continue in. If the opponent uses it to come with a second head from here, we'll now take it at a shorter, so it's used as a two-headed particular movement. Take a classic situation now, where once again, all of the opponents generally involved in the staff that is protecting themselves and then using the weapon to strike to the head or the body. What we're going to do in this particular case, I'll make the offensive movement from here, make the assumption the opponent's been able to clear the staff, pass the head, protect the hand, so we come in a counter. Once again, the opponent's interested in striking the head. All of my interest in doing is interrupting the attack so I can strike in a counter to the opponent's hand. This particular movement from here will take in such a situation, first of all, that my strike is to the opponent's head, but the opponent interrupts the movement from here. It's able to clear it. Notice as they come in with their strike, their primary object from here is to make the strike to the head. All I want to do is to interrupt that particular movement from here. And once again, my primary target is going to be the hand. Remember, once the opponent hasn't got any hands to use a weapon, then I can go in for any of the effective movements for what we call the kill. So your movement from here, as I make my strike to the opponent's head, the block is made. Notice the opponent is coming in with a strike to the head. I simply interrupt. Then at this point, if I don't hit directly to the hand, I simply continue to follow in. From this point then, we will drop the general discussion of the introduction of the different weapons. As we get into the individual weapons, there will be greater explanation made, particularly in the case of the spear and the swords. As we get now particularly into the staff sets, We'll give you first of all the staff sets, and we'll give you the application and individual breakdown of each of the movements from the offensive and defensive standpoint.